Hi, I'm Max Keiser. Welcome to On the Edge. Let's get right to it. Time to go to Michigan and talk with Kurt Cobb, author of Prelude, a novel about secrets, treachery, and the arrival of peak oil. Kurt Cobb, welcome to On the Edge.
Thanks for having me, Max.
All right, Kurt Cobb, give us a brief synopsis of your novel. Tell us why you wrote it.
Prelude is about a young female energy analyst who works for an energy consulting firm in Washington, D.C., and she discovers some secret information in the firm's files that convinces her that oil supplies are going to be desperately short in the next few years. Now, before that, she meets a former oil trader, and he tries to convince her that peak oil is something that's imminent, that's important, and she just completely dismisses this, of course, because she knows that her firm and many government agencies say we have plenty of oil for decades to come. But this information changes her mind, and then she becomes the target of people who don't want that information to be made public. So then she gets put into a game of cat and mouse that threatens not only her career, but also ultimately her life.
Okay, now let me cut in right there, because you're talking about a very dramatic thriller, woman caught up in a revelation about what the true global supply of oil is. But backing this up, of course, is something called peak oil. Countries around the world have hit the maximum production of oil. I'm talking about Mexico, which is now in free fall in production. The Bergin field in Kuwait is now in decline. Of course, America is in decline. The North Sea oil is in decline globally, including Saudi Arabia. And I want to ask you about this because according to WikiLeaks documents have suggested the U.S. State Department is now aware that Saudi Arabia in their Ghawar field, the biggest field in the world, they've been overstating their reserves. Your thoughts on this?
I'm not sure that they've been overstating their reserves. I think they have a lot left. I think the issue here is the rate of production, and that's always the issue with peak oil. We may have lots of oil left under the ground, but the question is, how much of it can we actually get out? Because we're getting to the harder and harder oil to get, and how fast can we get it out? And I think that given what we see in Saudi Arabia, maybe they've topped out. Now, there's two reasons why they might be doing that. It might be they simply can't produce more, or it may be that they made a conscious decision that they're going to save some of that oil for later. I can't be sure which, but it doesn't really matter. Peak oil comes when it comes for many reasons, and that may be one of the reasons that it's coming.
All right, now Barack Obama recently noticed that price of oil is trading above $100 a barrel again, $110, $115. He's blaming the speculators. No mention whatsoever by this administration that there might be production constraints. What's going on there?
Well, I think the Obama administration actually understands the issue of peak oil because their energy secretary, Stephen Chu, understands it. And we know this because it's already been in the press. So it's not a question of them not knowing. It's a question of them not being able to figure out how to present this to the public. And I don't blame them. It's pretty scary stuff. So if you want to get reelected, and he's in a reelection campaign already, then you have to tell people you're going to do something about oil prices. And so he's saying what people can understand, that it's speculators. I don't happen to agree with him. I think that might be a little bit of it, but I think most of it is running up against constraints.
Now, what's interesting, reading a report recently about Americans driving around in their car looking for cheaper gas and then running out of gas in the middle of nowhere and not knowing what to do. They simply look at the empty sign on the gas tank and they don't know what that means. They're flummoxed. They have no idea. Now, it seems that the entire country is headed for a similar scenario. One day, they're going to get into their car of the United States economy, and it's empty. There's no more left. And they'll ask themselves, gee, what does that mean? How can there be such an incredible disconnect?
Simply stated, nobody's told them the truth. And let's face it, Max, there's no upside for any politician to tell them the truth, because if they do, they'll be out of office the next time we have an election. So I think that's not where the truth is going to come from. And the media is dependent on a growing energy economy. So it's not in their interest to say much about it either. Although in some places there has been some indication, some stories about peak oil, but not much. It's a real threat to the way we live, to the way everything is organized, to the power structure as it is. So I think we're not likely to get that information from official sources, which is one of the reasons I wrote the book.
Okay, but there's something else going on here, because a lot of people watch this show. It's broadcast all over the world. I do many shows on this topic many times, and the comments that I see on the web are always to the effect of that peak oil is a myth. There's some kind of gooey center to the planet, which is something that can be used as oil. I forget what they call it. There's just this incredible denial. Isn't there a professional denial industry? The oil companies, of course, that are making lots of money on all this, isn't in there. What people don't understand, why the oil companies would feed a denial industry, because they themselves, once you hit peak oil, will be out of business. Is it just a matter of oil companies thinking over the next quarter and that's it? Once it's gone, they'll be left, everyone holding the bag, and they won't even care?
Let's face it, an oil company that can't find any more oil isn't going to remain an oil company for very long. But that said, large oil companies all over the world, and even small ones, have a significant inventory of oil and, of course, remaining under the ground. And so they want to make sure they can sell that. And since they don't quite buy this peak oil thing, they want to make sure that there's some pushback, that the public doesn't too quickly get off oil, because they don't want to be leaving it in the ground. Now, that's foolish public policy, but it's the policy that we are now pursuing. We're pursuing what I call the good to the last drop policy. And that's a sort of default option that I'm seeing around the world.
Okay, well, if you look in the Mideast, the U.S. spends hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars on wars in the Mideast, supposedly to secure energy security, when that amount of money could be spent developing alternative energy and achieving true energy independence. And they use Iran as a boogeyman to scare people into supporting a lot of their operations in the region. Now, why not just spend that money on alternative energy and leave those poor people in the Mideast alone?
Well, I think you've got it exactly right. Because if we in the United States took those trillions of dollars that we've spent on these, what have turned out to be completely fruitless wars, and spent it on alternative energy, spent it on efficient electrified transportation, I think we'd be saying a gradual goodbye to oil right now. I think we'd be using a lot less oil only because we've decided that we want to. We wouldn't be in a situation where we're being forced to. That would be a nice predicament. That would be a nice situation. But the fossil fuel industry in the United States is still very large. And of course, where you are in Europe, it's very small. There's not much in the way of fossil fuels left. And that's the political dynamic. In Europe, there's not a big fossil fuel lobby to fight renewable energy, to fight good public transportation. Here in the United States, we've still got this huge lobby because we have a lot of fossil fuels left in the ground. And they want to make sure that they sell all of them to us. That's bad public policy, but that's the reality.
Okay, so in the U.S., they've got fossil fuel in the ground. They're engaging in fracking, the fracturing of the crust of the earth to get at natural gas, which is causing an environmental holocaust. We know that's going on. But in Europe, of course, their big energy supplier comes in from Russia. And Russia recently passed Saudi Arabia to become the world's largest oil producer. So how is that dynamic playing out? Where do they stand on the peak oil curve? I don't hear anybody mentioning them, probably because it's mostly gas, right? And gas is a different story.
Well, gas is a different story, and there's actually quite a bit out there all over the world. I think, again, we're going to be faced with the rate problem. How fast can you get it out? You mentioned all these environmental issues. Well, those environmental issues are coming to the fore, and states are saying, wait a minute, we're going to slow down. Well, that's a constraint on how fast we're going to get out of the ground. And I think it's a proper constraint because we need to think about water in the long term instead of gas in the short term. But that said, look, these huge areas that are presumed to have a lot of natural gas, shale gas, well, there are sweet spots, and then there are spots that are not so sweet. And what we're seeing is all the sweet spots are being drilled. They're playing out very quickly. And so I think we're going to move on very soon to the harder and harder gas to get, and we're going to see a slowdown in the rate of growth and finally maybe a leveling out. So I'm not sure shale gas is going to turn out to be the miracle fuel. It is going to provide us with gas over the long term, but I don't think it's going to solve our peak oil problems. Now, you in Europe are making yourself more and more dependent on Russia, and that's a tricky situation. I don't know. How does it look from there? I mean, does that seem like a good idea?
I do. I ask the questions on this show.
Okay.
Kurt. So we can get to that later. But let me ask you about Canada for a second. Canada, of course, is heavily into the tar sands of Alberta. You mentioned water. And this particular form of extracting energy is very water contingent, and water is a scarce supply as well. This tar sands methodology is moving into the United States as well. So how much water, and if you know the figures here, does it go into this tar sands extraction? And what about this trend about it moving into the U.S.?
Well, you're right about water, and I think the Canadians and we may regret moving into the oil sands arena if we don't figure out how to get it out of the ground using something other than, or reprocess it really, using something other than a lot of water. As it turns out, when Alberta was producing about 1 million barrels a day, they were using 1/4 of the fresh water supply of Alberta. And now they want to go up to 5 million barrels a day by 2030. So by my calculations, if they don't get a lot more efficient than in their use of water, that's 5/4 of the fresh water supply of Alberta. Well, that's just not going to work. Now, they are working on other ways to get out of the ground that are a little more benign. So I think that those ways are going to, some of them are going to succeed, and we're going to see a diminution in the use of water. But, you know, there's always these unanticipated problems with new techniques like fracking with shale gas. So I'm not sure we can count on those new techniques to be completely benign. I think we're going to see other problems. So I think the reason that we have the oil sands exploitation is because of the way we live. It's not inevitable unless we make it inevitable. And I think that's what's happened. We've said, well, we've got this resource, so we're going to use it regardless of what the consequences are. So now that's another constraint. And I think that we're going to see more and more of those constraints wherever we go. We're going to go after that harder and harder to get oil, and it's going to pose all kinds of new environmental hazards, and we're going to have to make a decision about whether that's acceptable.
All right, legendary investor Jeremy Grantham, he's got a report out. He says that we are at the end of the age of hydrocarbons. What are your thoughts there?
Well, I think he's right. And of course, climate change is one good reason for us to be at the end of the age of hydrocarbons. But I think supply constraints are going to be the other reason. And you may be aware of a report that has come out just last year about worldwide coal supplies from existing mines. Now, there are new supplies that could be gotten from Siberia and from Alaska. Those would be very expensive to get. But existing mines, this report said that existing mines are going to peak this year. Now, that's something no one has anticipated. And it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out in the next few years. But even if that report is wrong, by 10 years, we're not going to be able to build a coal-based economy over the next 10 years, and only to find that we've reached another peak. So I think he's right. Gas will last longer probably than coal, but if we use it at a faster rate, we'll use it up faster and we'll reach the peak sooner. So the idea that coal or natural gas is going to bail us out of peak oil, I don't think that's going to happen. So I think he's hit it right on the nose.
I don't know if you've done a lot of study or work in this area I'm about to ask you. I'm sure you have, so I'm going to ask this question. There is, of course, another problem with the energy business, in that it is extremely credit intensive. You need to borrow lots of money, you need a lot of capital, and especially now with prices going higher and with availability becoming scarcer, you got to go out and you got to look for it in more dangerous places that cost a lot more money. We're in a period around the world now where some people call it peak credit. In other words, the banks are still suffering tremendously. There's still huge dislocations going on in the credit markets around the world. Is credit a factor as well going forward at these higher prices?
Credit is going to be a big factor. In fact, I think we've got a twin crisis. We've got energy constraints, we've got an energy crisis, and we also have a credit or capital crisis. We're unable to deploy credit in places that we need it because our whole credit system is completely impaired. And I think that it's even more impaired today than it was in 2008, if that gives you an indication of where I think we're headed. So, and the other thing is the volatility in the energy markets makes it impossible for companies to set out long-term drilling plans knowing what they might expect in the way of prices. So what we see is this rush to drill when prices are high, and then a retrenchment when prices decline. And I think we're going to see that again and again. Well, you can't build up consistent supplies with that kind of strategy. So I think you may be right that peak credit is combining with peak oil to make the energy situation even worse.
All right, you just said something there I want to talk about here. You said that credit conditions are more impaired now than in 2008. Now, back in 2008, we had a credit contraction, the global credit crisis. The U.S. government and banks around the world threw trillions of fresh credit at this problem. And yet, you and others are saying that the situation is worse now than it was even in 2008. What went wrong?
Instead of trying to work through some of the bad credit, we said, no, what we need to do is create more credit because we have a whole system that's based on ever-expanding credit. We need to save the day for all those who are in debt, and that includes a lot of rich people. So we went ahead and created all this new credit, but how did we create it? Basically, it's all government-backed credit. Private credit continues to shrink. And that's what tells me that we're in trouble because consumers cannot take on any more credit. If they can't take any more credit, then who's going to do all the buying? Right now, we have what analyst Doug Nolan calls a government finance bubble. And this has got to be the last bubble because governments are the source of credit of last resort. And once their credit worthiness is questioned, and we're seeing this now all over Europe, credit worthiness of Portugal and Greece and Ireland are being questioned. And I don't think it's going to be too long before some major countries have their credit questioned. In fact, the United States was put on a negative watch by, I think it was S&P. And so we're already moving down that road. Once the sovereign credit goes sour in some major countries, I think we're going to find that the government credit bubble is over, and then we're going to have to work out these debts. Well, as we work them out, we're going to be in a credit and capital crisis that, again, is going to feed back into our energy crisis. It's not a good prognosis.
Okay, let's revisit something you mentioned there. You mentioned that government credit is expanding while private credit is shrinking. In other words, government credit, you could say, is crowding out private credit. In other words, instead of allowing bad companies to go bust or letting bad banks go bust, by putting them on life support system, by expanding the government's credit, now you've got two problems here. You've got an economy that's becoming dwarfed by the government's involvement, which is the least productive aspect of an economy, and you're shrinking the most productive aspect, which is the private enterprise sector. So, in fact, you've got encroaching socialism in America in that the banks are on this permanent credit of expanding money, and they don't seem to have to work for it. They just get it gifted to them. And everyone else who's actually trying to work for a living is getting blown to bits and shrinking, and they can't get credit. Is that fair assessment?
I think that's a fair assessment, and let's keep in mind that this is socialism for the rich, not for the rest of us. So, yes, that's exactly what's happening. And I think that if we had decided to go down that road in any case, there are dangers in any case, and we had given those funds to people who were in the middle and lower classes, we'd be in a lot better shape than we are today. I'm not saying everything would be fine, but a lot of debts would get paid off. What's happening is a lot of debts are not getting paid off, especially mortgage debt. And so we're going to see those defaults come in eventually when the government finance bubble bursts, and then we're going to have to deal with them. We could have had a rational stepping away from excessive credit creation, but the people at the top didn't want that. They thought they could keep this party going for quite a bit longer, maybe forever.
Okay, let's talk politics here. In the U.S., Republicans just voted against any cuts to the billions in subsidies the U.S. taxpayers give those welfare bums, big oil. Now, what about other nations? Do we see any sort of advanced technologies coming online anytime in the next decade or two? That's a part two of this question. Number one, your thoughts on the vote against stopping the subsidies to these big oil companies. What are your thoughts?
As you know now, the way that politics are polarized in the United States, anything that Barack Obama is for, the Republicans are against. If he came out for subsidies for big oil companies, I think that they just might vote against them. So I'm not sure that there's a strict ideological conclusion that we can draw from this. But in any case, I think I don't think Barack Obama would have come out too strongly against the fossil fuel companies because they are, after all, the ones that supply a lot of money to his campaign and campaigns of others, and they still have a stranglehold on Congress. So I think that's what explains it. Now, who to watch for future energy technologies? Well, it's the Chinese. They've been focusing on all kinds of new things. They're trying to become a leader in wind and in solar. And now they've talked about moving toward what are called liquid salt or molten salt reactors, which are much, much safer than what we see in Fukushima and really around the world. I don't know whether they're actually going to do it, but it would certainly be, in terms of nuclear, a step in the right direction. So I would say look to China for those new technologies.
All right, we've got about a minute left. I want to return to your novel. It's called Prelude. Kurt Cobb is the author. You've taken the story of peak oil and you've turned it into a fiction, presumably to get the narrative across in a way that is more digestible, if you will, unless you have aspirations on the prose side to be the next Hemingway. I'm not sure what your thoughts are there. But it seems like you're trying to get this message through using a novel. And what's been the response? Do people, has it converted some folks to thinking more logically about this, or are they still deep in denial?
Of course, there's a lot of activists who've purchased the book, and they want to use it as a tool to give to their friends and their family and their coworkers. And so a lot of that has been happening. That's been very gratifying. But there are people, of course, who have never heard of peak oil, who are buying this book. And I get to hear from some of them. They'll email me or they're friends of friends. And what they say is, gee, I had no idea. That seems to be the consistent theme. I had no idea. And so that tells me that there's a lot of work to be done. And I've couched this in fiction because there are some people who are simply not going to pick up a nonfiction work on peak oil and read it. But they might read a thriller that is going to be fun to learn about the oil industry. And I think this year might be a very good year for the book because we have such high oil prices and people are looking for answers. So that was my thinking in writing a piece of fiction.
Hey, that's all the time for we have. Kurt Cobb, thanks so much for being on The Edge.
Thank you, Max. I've really enjoyed it.
All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of On the Edge with me, Max Keiser. I want to thank my guest, Kurt Cobb. If you want to send me an email, please do so at ontheedge@presstv.com. Until next time, this is Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.